40 Years with a Perm, the Psychological and Physical Consequences of African American Women's Hair Care Practices. First, I'd like to go over the objectives of this presentation. The first is to provide a framework for understanding African American women's hair care and styling practices. Secondly, to conceptualize and introduce hair stress as a construct. And next, present findings from a preliminary investigation of the hair stress construct. And finally, discuss implications of findings for future research practices and the well-being of African American women. I'd like to begin with just giving you some background and history on African American women's hair care experiences and their hair care practices, just to give you a context for the study that I conducted. Many of you probably already know, during pre-colonial Africa, or prior to Europeans colonizing the continent, African engaged in some very intricate hairstyling and grooming practices, and I'm going to show you some photos. And also the hairstyles had a lot of symbolism and meaning. And I don't know if you all are familiar with Willie Morrow's 400 Years Without a Comb. This is an excellent piece. You've heard of it, you've never seen the copy. It's by Willie Morrow, M-O-R-R-O-W. 400 Years Without a Comb. It's a video as well. If it is, I haven't heard of the video, but this is the text, and basically it gives a history of African descendant women's hair experiences, or just Africans in general, not just women, but a lot of it is relevant for the women. But I wanted to show you some of the pictures because they engaged in a lot of their hairstyling and grooming was very important. It was real rich part of the culture. And so these are some of the pictures so that you can see some of the styles and the adornment of the hair. And also there's some similarities between how we wear our hairstyles. Like this is a two-strand twist style, if you all recognize it. So some of what they did centuries ago, we are practicing today. And there's some other pictures. This is like the precursor to our 70s Afro, this style. So there's some really neat styles. And then I thought about the high top fade when I saw this style. This is of an African male. And in terms of the instruments they used, these are some examples of some of the instruments that they use for the styling of the hair. The picks, as you can see. These longer instruments are for the parting of the hair. More pictures of picks and combs. Again, there's some really interesting instruments that they used. I want to show you just a couple of more. Because as I was saying, the hair was very symbolic, and so it represented age, social status. Also, for men, it represented whether or not they were a warrior or whether or not they were getting prepared for war. So this, certain styles signified the status of the individual or the situation that they were in. Let's see. And then I just want to show you this. This is an example of, they spent hours sometimes with the grooming and hair styling. So you see the woman here styling the other woman's hair. And sometimes it took hours or a couple of days to complete a style. As we know, when you go to get certain hairstyles, for example, the braiding styles that we sometimes select for ourselves involves a 2-day process, if not longer, depending on what you select. Again, here's another photo. So I just wanted to show you an example of some of the different types of styles that our ancestors wore prior to colonization. Okay. Yeah, I can pass it around. Let me see. let me go through a couple more because I'm gonna reference this for a couple more times, and then I'll slide it forward, and then you can take a look at it. I think it's be interesting to look at. So then what happened is when the colonization process began and the enslavement process began in the transport of Africans to the New World, we all know that the cultural oppression became very prominent. Our ancestors were removed from their culture of origin so that they did not have the products, nor did they have the instruments to care for their hair or groom themselves. And they often were prohibited from, even if they had instruments, they were prohibited from taking care of their hair. Sometimes there was even abuse associated with that. And then they didn't have the time. They were busy, engaged in other tasks and responsibilities. So again, what you found was over time there was changes in the meaning of hair. And there are other pictures. What you found is that because of the cultural oppression, the lack of time to groom and care for oneself, you started to see changes in women started to wear hair rags or scarves, and there were problems associated with the hair and the scalp because of the lack of grooming. And let's see. So that displacement really began to affect our ability to care for our hair. Not only that, we had we were exposed to another models. We started being introduced and exposed to other models of beauty and hair care. And here is an example here of a picture of a European woman and an African woman with a hair scarf, and then the woman, the European woman is able to groom and adorn herself and take care of herself. And here's another picture with an African descended woman admiring the hair of a European child, it looks like in this picture. So the models of beauty, or the models or standards for appropriate hair, that begin to change. And so we began to embrace a different standard of hair, as well as reject and feel disdain and dislike for our own hair during that process. And the standard of beauty that we've probably used, some of you have probably read about it in the literature, is the blonde hair, which is typically straight and long, and then other characteristics, light skin, thinness. But in this case, we're referencing the hair, the straight, the long. Oops. How do I get back there? Oh, I could have went back that way. And go back here. Come on. You said I can go arrow key? That's not doing it. Okay, let me go back. You said from the slideshow I can go back. There we go. No. Okay. So the process of rejecting the hair began. And so we found that there was a process of and a desire to emulate that European style of hair. And what we began to do is, over time, financially investing a lot of money in getting the hair done. And, we all know there's a multi-billion-dollar hair care industry that exists that we support. And then the hair care styling approaches have changed in that we use a lot of unnatural approaches to hair care, like the perming and the dyeing and the straightening and the lengthening and the weaving. All of those approaches we began to engage in to try to approximate that European ideal or that European standard of what it meant to have beautiful hair and to be and feel attractive. As well as the result of engaging in those practices, we found that women began to experience hair problems, the breakage, the hair loss, and as a result, most of us find when you're having a bad hair day or you're having problems with the hair in your scalp, you don't necessarily feel so good about yourself. So it began to affect us emotionally. Self-esteem levels began to decrease, increase in levels of anxiety. And so out of that, based on the literature and the sociocultural experiences, and doing my own research and conceptualizing this whole matter over time, I developed this construct called hair stress. And hair stress is the harmful physical and psychological effects of persistent and improper hair care and styling practices used to transform the hair from its natural or authentic state to achieve and maintain a desired natural texture and appearance. So that's a construct that I developed. And hair loss studies provided some support for the construct, because if you look at the different hair loss research, you're all familiar with the condition alopecia, which is synonymous to hair loss. And there are different types of alopecia. The chemical, which is just using perms and relaxers or dyes that result in hair loss. Or traction alopecia is the alopecia that or hair loss associated with braiding or the pulling of the hair, or using hot combs or pressing combs, and that resulted in hair loss. So that's traction alopecia. And then there's the genetic form of alopecia, the AGA, the androgenetic alopecia, and that is, I'm not sure the origins of that, but that is more of an uncontrollable type of alopecia, whereas the chemical or the traction is a controllable because it's the result of certain decisions or certain hair care practices. And then cancer research also talks about people who, particularly women, who experience hair loss due to cancer treatment, due to chemotherapy. There is a psychological distress associated with that type of hair loss, or psychosocial problems with psychosocial functioning. And then dermatological research similarly points out that hair loss leads to distress, particularly for women. And then our Pamela Farrell talks about this and others in her work. She's a natural hairstylist and promotes natural hair care products and practices. And based on her reports and her interactions with clients, so based on anecdotal reports, we have found that there is psychological distress associated with hair loss or hair damage or scalp conditions. And so that gives some additional support for my construct. But the literature, which leads to my rationale, while we talk about this as a phenomenon or occurrence that we're very familiar with among African-descended women, we find that in the literature there aren't any empirical investigations that have looked at this experience. There are reports, there are conceptual pieces, but the experimental research is not present. So in terms of rationale, the limited awareness about prevalence of scalp conditions and hair damage and loss due to hair care practices. And in my case, I'm more interested in the controllable factors, meaning that we make decisions to perm our hair, we make decisions to style our hair in certain ways, which results in hair damage or hair loss. And then I did mention the lack of empirical research in this area is important, and so that's the rationale for for the study. Okay, and the purpose: to examine the effects of hair loss and scalp conditions due to unnatural hair care practices on the psychological well-being of African American women. And my study in particular tests a measure of hair damage due to unnatural hair care and styling, and its association with self-esteem in a sample of African American female and male college students. And also, I wanted to test the validity of my construct hair stress. So, I proposed or hypothesized that there would be a negative relationship between hair damage and self-esteem, i.e. hair stress, and that hair stress would not be mediated by general self-image concerns. And you'll see what I mean by the self-image concerns. The methodology. Okay, participants in this study. There are 106 African American female and 106 African Americans. I'm sorry, that's a typo. But there were 89 African American females in the sample, and there were 17 males. You probably always point out there is a small n in this study. There is a limitation which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they were all enrolled in a predominantly black Southern university. The age ranges 18 to 39. Majority of the sample were traditional college students between the ages of 18 and 21. Education, most of the students were second, third, and fourth year college students. Instrumentation. As I mentioned, measure of hair damage was developed from two items from a lifestyle and health survey that I put together. And the hair damage measure was developed from the following two items. Have you ever experienced scalp irritation or burns from using chemical relaxers or treatment? And the second item, have you ever experienced hair loss or damage from using chemical relaxers or treatment? And how it depended on how the participants responded determined the severity of hair damage. So if they, the severity ranged from 0 to 3. 0, they received a score of 0 if they indicated that they had experienced no scalp irritation or hair loss, which was a measure of no hair damage. Mild hair damage was if they reported scalp irritation but no hair loss. And then moderate hair damage was if they reported no scalp irritation but that they had experienced hair loss. And then the severe hair damage was a measure of scalp irritation, both scalp irritation and hair loss. So that's the measure for hair damage. And then there are two other hair-related measures that were used for this study. Hair satisfaction, which is it's a subscale. It's an item from the body area satisfaction subscale, which is part of Thomas Cash's multidimensional body self-relation questionnaire. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other, and the question, as you see, is how dissatisfied or satisfied are you with your hair? And this is the direct question from the survey. And they're asking them about the color, the thickness, the texture. So how satisfied are you with your hair? And then I added to my lifestyle and health survey to assess the extent that they like their natural hair. So that was a measure that was in there and then the lifestyle and health surveys was an 82 item that attained a broad range of health-related behaviors and condition. And that particular liking natural hair item was a part of that survey. And then Cash's multidimensional body self-relations questionnaire was used. 69 items, 10 subscales, and those are the 10 subscales. And the alphas, if you look, the alphas that I'm showing are the alphas from the current sample. So they weren't the alphas from his normalized sample, but from my particular study. So there were 10 subscales, and basically these scales measured a range of attitudes about self-image or different aspects of a person's body, or their attitudes about their body image. Okay. And then the measure for self-esteem that I used was Rosenberg's self-esteem, which is a measure of global self-esteem. Again, the alpha is pretty good. And then there was some demographic information obtained, and the items relevant for this particular study were, as you see, age, gender, race, ethnicity, education. Okay, the procedures. The survey was administered to the college students by a female, African-American female professor. The students were enrolled in sections of psychology courses that she taught. Number coding for anonymity and confidentiality was a part of the procedures, and participation was voluntary, although of course extra credit was offered to the students for participating, and then they were given an alternative option. If they didn't want to participate in this study, they had options to participate in other projects. And then of course the study was approved by the IRB at my home institution, as well as the institution where the researchers where the data was collected. Okay, moving right along. Okay, first I did an assessment of the hair stress construct. One way ANOVA was self-esteem as a dependent variable, and the severity of hair damage as the independent variable, using that hair damage measure that I just referenced or described. And what I found was that there was a significant difference between levels of hair damage as a function of severity of hair damage. And that hair damage was negatively correlated with self-esteem, which provided support for the hair stress construct. And I will show you my figure depicts the relationship between hair damage and self-esteem. As you can see, the higher levels of self-esteem associated with less severe hair damage. And as you go along, so on the right, more severe hair damage is associated with lower levels of self-esteem. So I was pretty happy with the finding in terms of the relationship. The data supported the direction that I conceptualized and proposed. And then I did some stepwise regression analysis with self-esteem as a dependent variable and hair damage. There was a three-stage or step model, and in the first model, self-esteem again was the dependent variable, and then hair damage was in model 1, and then in model 2 or step 2, I added gender to control for gender, and then I added the self-image variables, and those are all of the scales from Cash's instrument. Those were all added in model 3. And what I found was that hair damage remained significant and negative, a significant negative correlate of self-esteem. And it was independent of gender and the self-image variables. And just for some additional information, hair damage accounted for 10% of the variance, and then gender and the others were additional 45%. Let me see something here. Go to the next slide. So then I decided to look at whether or not there were any gender differences in the sample. And I did between group comparisons for males and females on the hair-related items using the t-test and the MANOVA. And what we found there was that compared to men, women reported dissatisfaction with the hair and disliking their natural hair. Also, women reported more concerns about their appearance and their level of attractiveness than men. And that was measured by one of Cash's scales, the appearance orientation scale. Okay, so there were some gender effects in this study. And here's a table of some of those. This shows the mean and standard deviations of all the variables. The hair damage The hair-related items are first, and then the caches are follow. And you see that hair satisfaction, there was a gender difference. You can see the men had reported more satisfaction. The mean is higher, 4.59 compared to the women, and that was significant at the 0.01 level. Liking natural hair, that difference was greater, more substantial. As you see, the ends for 2.5 and 4.06 for the men, and then the appearance orientation variable, there is a significant difference there with women being more concerned about their appearance or their attractiveness than men. And those are just additional variables. None of those others showed a gender effect. That's just a continuation of the table. Okay. And then figure 2 shows the gender effect for the 2 significant hair-related variables. Hair satisfaction, as you can see, for the men is greater, as well as for liking natural hair, where women are definitely liking their natural hair less than males. Then I did some supplemental analysis just to see what else I could find out. And I wanted to determine whether or not there was, whether gender mediated the relationship between the hair related variables, and that would be the hair satisfaction and the liking of natural hair. And what I found is that when the difference when controlling for gender, the difference between liking natural hair and hair satisfaction, that significance was lessened. And then there was another one. I thought this one was pretty compelling. The last one, Cash has a overweight preoccupation scale in this survey. That was one of the subscales. And there's an item that looks at dieting to lose weight. And I correlated that with liking natural hair just to try and test whether or not there would be some support for women's desire to conform to the mainstream standard of beauty. And I found that relationship was there. So there was a negative association between liking natural hair and dieting to lose weight. So as women who reported the dieting to lose weight, they showed less liking for their natural hair. So I thought that was pretty compelling finding, something that could be further investigated. Okay, so to summarize the findings, again, there was a significant negative relationship between hair damage due to hair care practices and self-esteem, which supported hypothesis 1 and the hair stress construct. Hypothesis 2 showed that the significant correlation between hair damage and self-esteem remained after controlling for self-image variables. So that was support for hypothesis 2. And then the supplemental analysis, as I just talked about, showed that there's a tendency for African American women to conform to mainstream standards of beauty more so than men. And some of the implications. Because African American women seem to continue to engage in some of the unnatural hair care practices and or experience the hair damage associated with them, the findings from the study sort of suggest that maybe that they are not attending to or viewing the hair damage as a significant problem or a serious problem because the practice continues. That's a possible way of viewing it. Also, an implication is that there's a need for, I think, increased awareness about the sociocultural experiences and influences of hair care practices, part of understanding the history and how we even begin to engage in unnatural hair care over time, and how we have maintained that behavior in spite of the negative consequences for our health. And one of the things I'd like to say is that, because I know that sometimes we can be very sensitive about our hair and our hair care. I know a lot of women say, well, I perm my hair because it's easier to manage, and I don't, and this study is not about criticizing people for different hair care choices. My interest is really pointing out that there are some health implications for the choices of hair care styling that we choose to engage in. And I'm not sure if we are really mindful of the longer term implications of the perms and the dyings and the repeated weaves and the combination. You know, a lot of times we use those concurrently. We'll get a perm and then we'll go get some gazillion braids, and, you know, women have talked about losing hair. You know, the hair just kind of slipping out of the follicle because of, you know, that strain and that the complications physiologically that creates when you use multiple unnatural hair care practices concurrently. So I really, that's where my interests lie. And then I think that the findings from the results show that there is a need for a cultural redefinition of what's acceptable, what's an acceptable standard of beauty for us with regards to our hair, because there is pressure for us starting at a young age to conform to or embrace Eurocentric models of beauty and attractiveness. And so we, again, you know, I've learned this from being a member of ABSI for a long time, is that we have to really begin to define who we are as African women or African descendant women, and create and set our own models for not only for beauty and acceptance, but also, in this case, really where I am more concerned about for our health. And so definitely there's a need for more education, interventions and prevention programs and approaches to facilitate healthier hair care choices among African American women. I think the media plays a huge part in that. And so media campaigns and advertisements that promote images of natural hair care and affirm African American authentic hairstyles, that's very important. It's not on here, but I think in addition to that, I think in terms of supporting the community, we need our men to support natural hair and embrace our hair as it is, and we need parents to have awareness about the importance of not applying unnatural hair care products on children's hair, little girls' hair, and sending the message that you're beautiful if your hair looks like this, versus let's make this hair a healthy head of natural hair look beautiful. Let's learn how to manage and work with that. And then professionals working with African American women, having some knowledge about my concept, hair stress, but also healthy approaches to the manageability and styling of natural hair is important. If you're going to be working with black women, if one comes in that office and it appears as though she's having some challenges with her hair, you need to first be able to understand what hair challenges look like, but also underlying that emotionally what she may be going through. And we know it's like when your feet hurt, when your hair doesn't look good, you don't feel good. And so I think the professionals, we as psychologists or others working with African American women, other healthcare professionals, need to understand this issue and how serious it is, and how to help us and how to intervene or make recommendations, referrals to somebody who can help. Like I said, this is a preliminary investigation, so then there's some limitations to the study. The sample size is small, so I definitely need to replicate the study to assess the strength and the validity of the construct, and just to look at the findings again to see if I have a larger N, if the results are going to be similar. And I'm pretty confident that if I administered this to a larger sample, I'm going to get some of the same results. Maybe even something stronger may come out, or something more enlightening may result from the investigation. So that's something, that's a plan. The self-report data, anytime you do a study with self-report, there are concerns about, how accurate the reports are. And so I think that some more objective measures in future investigations will be important. Maybe surveys that they use in dermatological research, maybe some medical or diagnostic results from those kinds of exams might be helpful in assessing the hair damage, for example, would be helpful. And then I did not ask in this study about the particular nature of the unnatural hair care practices. We just asked about whether or not they experienced the damage or the hair loss, but didn't assess anything about the hair care. And then anytime you have correlation, you can't imply causality. And so that's always a limitation of investigations. So, any questions or comments at this point? Anybody have?
I'm really glad that you did this study, because it fits in a lot with, I do I work at a university counseling center, and so oftentimes I do a presentation where I talk with African American women about hair and the practices, and we kind of end up getting into a discussion oftentimes about the effect of skin color and body image and that sort of thing. But it starts out with the hair and whether or not people are willing to wear their hair in a natural state, etc. And I know that oftentimes it's been a little distressing to me, the number of African American women who've attended these presentations who traditional age college students, they've never felt their natural hair. They have literally no idea what their natural hair even feels like. And when I've talked about when I have worn my hair in a natural state, they're like, well, how did you get it that way? And how did you get it to stand up? And it horrified me that they had no concept of their natural hair.
I'm glad you're working with young women and working to address some of these concerns. And I think a hairstylist, I forgot to mention them. Hairstylists, I think they need to be a part of that whole conversation, and the cultural redefinition and changing some of their hair care approaches. Because some hairstylists, they really damage them. Yeah, black women's hair.
but they tell a lot of stories about as a young child having gotten the perms and stuff as a very young child, and it just hasn't been that uncommon. They just make a lot of negative comments about natural hair. It's so nappy, and it's just not good for the self-esteem. It's not good.
Yeah. That again, through the socialization process, when you authentic hair is associated with negativity or associated with not having benefits or privilege. I don't think I mentioned that early on. Is that we have the more closely you approximate that European standard of beauty, the more privileges and benefits you experience. And so that was part of that motivation for I got to change this, because this. They were talking yesterday about how we ate chitlins. We ate chitlins because that was a means of survival. And I think that, and we said yes, a massa because it was a means of survival. But I think that hair care is similar, it's a similar thing. We permed that hair, we straightened it because I couldn't gain access if I went in there with this. This was not acceptable. And so if I wanted to feed my family, if I wanted to get that position, then I made those changes. And we don't have to do that anymore. Because what was once a survival strategy or approach is, we don't necessarily do that as much as we did. So I think that we need to start, again, we need to redefine and support people in the process, yes.
Hi, I'm sorry, I had some questions.
I guess they're still related, but not specifically about hair. You said that you created the LHS.
I just compiled some items. It's a kind of comprehensive health survey because I was looking at gather data for some other reasons.
Okay, I thought you created some scale items yourself. You didn't write any yourself. You just took some from different scales.
For which one?
I thought it was the LHS.
Well, I mean, you know, if you have you look at models of items and you decide, okay, these are items that I want to use or I want to assess this area. So I developed some items, and then some I looked at other instruments and decided, you know, I want to use some similar items for the lifestyle and health survey. But the liking natural hair, that was mine. I added that. All the hair-related items were mine, except for the one in the cash survey.
So I was just wondering if you factor analyzed the scale.
No, I did not.
Okay. Are you considering doing that and publishing it by chance?
What part? That's a two-part question. I'm gonna publish the manuscript is ready for publication.
The actual scale.
The hair damage measure.
Because is that what it was? A hair damage measure?
I developed that. Well, I don't think that'll be factor analyzed. It's only 2 items.
It's only 2 items.
Yeah, the hair damage measure was developed from 2 questions that I developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just was really unclear on that. So, gotcha. Thank you. So primarily you use Cash's.
I use his, he's done the factor analysis and all of that with his work.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a 69 item scale.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes.
You were saying that the hair damage and the self-esteem, that was independent of gender and other self-images. So does that mean that they could still have a high self-esteem in other areas, you know, with their appearance, but then they just, when it comes to their hair, they have a negative self-esteem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other self-image variables did not confound or did not influence that effect. The hair damage had on self-esteem. So that which gives more support for that construct. It's like that it's independent from these other self-image concerns that a woman may have.
Okay, and then you also said the correlation reduced to non-significance when controlling for gender. So when you controlled for gender, it was still the same. I'm confused.
For
the I think it was the hair or the liking natural hair.
The 2 when I did that partial correlation between the hair-related variables, looking whether or not there was a gender effect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then there was let's see. Gender mediated the relationship between liking natural hair and hair satisfaction. Okay, that was a gender effect. And I showed you the table where it showed that the men were different than the women, more satisfied with their hair and less, more satisfaction with their hair and liking their natural hair more. Okay, so there was a gender effect there. Okay, well, and what question were you asking? You were asking about the
correlation reduced to non-significance when controlling for gender. I just don't understand what that was.
That was this was just a gender influenced. It reduced to non-significant when controlling for gender, meaning that there was a gender effect.
Okay.
You follow?
Yeah.
Okay. So if when you control for gender, if it's significantly reduced, that shows that there's a gender effect there.
Okay.
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 So do you think that men have an effect on how women view their hair? Do you think that, like a man's opinion or whatever, do you think that has an effect on the way that women, whether they want to wear their hair natural or permed or anything like that? Do you think there's a significance with that, or do you think it's mainly mainstream culture?
I think it's, mainstream culture, and I think men are affected by mainstream culture.
Okay. In terms.
So therefore, it may be difficult for some. And there's some that support women. That's my maker right back there, and he supports what I do, and that makes it easier for me to do what I need to do. I mean, I can embrace me, and I was able to do it because I had natural hair when I met him. But the fact that he doesn't say, "Why don't you perm your hair? Why don't you get some of that long? You know, I want you to wear dye it blonde or do whatever."
So basically,
I don't have that pressure.
You have to help men and women, you know, because it's one thing for women to change their hair, but if men are still going to be like, well, you should do this and do that, you know, so do you think that the way to solve it is to address both genders, or?
I think that we need to, there's a cultural shift that there's a cultural redefinition that needs to occur, and I think we all are a part of that, and so therefore everyone needs to be a part of this process of redefining what's acceptable, redefining what we identify as healthy for us, what's attractive for us. Yeah. I think it's a global approach to it's me. Yes.
I think I'm going to be saying how men who there was a higher acceptance of their natural hair for men than for women, and I was wondering like if you got anything as far as having a higher acceptance of natural hair on women from men. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, they accepted their natural hair, but they accept natural hair on women.
Oh, I didn't ask that question. So that would be a question to ask in future research.
Okay.
Yes.
They could really only have their natural hair, like. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know too many guys that just have a perm. So
Even when low it's low,
they do the texturizers.
Yeah.
The texturizers. Yeah. It may look natural, but it's shiny.
Yeah.
sometimes they texturize.
I'm just going off of real life stuff just because I hear guys saying that they like natural hair on women, but they never really show with their actions.
Meaning that they may date someone who doesn't wear natural hair.
It looks good on you, but yeah, it's just you.
Yeah. So, because they've been affected too by this long history of, what has been defined as attractive and beautiful. Yeah. So, we have to just, learn, accept this is where we are. That's why I said that the socio-cultural influences, we need awareness about that. And, how the history has transformed us and how it has influenced how we, our self-image and, how we view ourselves. Yes?
In regard to Cash's scale, do you know who he normalized the scales on or who the populations were? Was that mentioned in studies?
She's a researcher in the back. She's asking all these different questions, which is good. No, this is because it's a solid scale. The one for this particular study, I can find that out for you. I don't know off the top of my head if he, but he's done so many studies. I imagine he's probably he's definitely used college students, but whether or not and I'm sure he's also used other samples as well, standardized it on the community at large. Because he's done a whole lot of research with his instruments. That's one of the reasons why I chose it.
Well, my concern is regard to African Americans being a part of his sample.
Yes.
And if so, or I don't know, but maybe you can answer this as well. Do you think it may be important just to have a scale normalized on African American attraction, period, or women, questions that may be more direct towards hair about that? Or do you think Cash's works just fine and was a good fit?
Well, Cash only has one item that I used for hair.
Okay.
That from the Body Hair Satisfaction, there was one item that I used from hair, about hair, and then the other were ones that I added.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. The normal, the sample that the instrument standardized on, normalized on, definitely needs to include African American women, but also there needs to be some scales specifically established to assess our experiences and our behaviors.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know about the research piece, but I don't know how much research there is, say, on like when you're talking about like scales specifically for African American beauty.
Yeah, there's I study attraction. I was very interested in this. The next project I actually want to do is on hair, and everything is anecdotal. I mean, when you go, like you said, you go to the literature, you will not find anything. You will hear. We know that hair, period, is in a cue of attractiveness for all men. It's just it's just there. But as far in regard to black men, there's no information. In regard to how we feel about our hair, there's no information. So I'm just going to be very exploratory, like what you're doing. So I'm really picking your brain to see, kind of how you went and how you went about this, and just the more empirical that we can make anything, the stronger it is. So that's why I was asking about like the fact.
I encourage you to do that because it took me a while to go ahead and finish this project because I was struggling with, again, is it how people are, how they respond to it. I mean, we talk about it here as a part of our discussions on a regular basis. We know this.
Right.
But when it really comes down to, okay, let's put it out there. I didn't know how much pushback I would get or how much it would be embraced, but it's important. So whatever, because there's a gap in the literature. So if you see one, you study it.
I haven't done anything. I've been looking for years, and
You're gonna have to do your own notes.
I think so. Or I said create a scale, which I've never thought about because I think a little, scales are great for self-report, so I'm always thinking like, how can we give strong evidence to this? But that's also
so it's
be matched with.
His is self-report.
Yeah, but it can definitely be matched with some other things. So.
You do it, and I encourage you.
Thank you.
I guess I'm trying to figure out is, are you looking at, since there's so much diversity in hair within the Black population, are you really looking at the healthy acceptance being wherever you are with it, or is this really an issue of preference for a certain type of hair and comfortableness with hair that is not perhaps naturally straight? I don't know if this is making sense. I'm just trying to struggle with that idea. I guess I came up along when people who had naturally straight hair that had some concerns during really the kind of the Black Power kind of movement, and they were trying to get their hair.
Yeah, so
so I'm just trying to figure out where we're considering psychological health around hair, and if it's more an openness to hair, whatever it is, or just kind of a desensitization to thinking that kinky hair is something that's not desirable.
Okay. I think you're talking about another dimension, okay, that we can look at. My focus, I think I tried to speak to it earlier, is I'm really more concerned about us engaging in unnatural hair care practices that create physical health consequences for us. So if you have straight hair, and I mean, if your hair is more loosely curled, and you're not perming it or dyeing it, then I'm more concerned about women who, whatever hair you were born with, embrace that hair, love that hair. Don't engage in unnatural hair care practices that creates physical health problems for you, which result in psychological distress as well. That's my focus.
What about those who say that they are engaging in some processes and they don't see it as physically damaging?
Yeah, that was one of the points that I had raised that we need to increase awareness about, because I don't think some people recognize that there is a relationship between what they do and their health and the health consequences associated. How you get on that cycle. It's a cycle. Once you start, you just keep going, and you don't realize. So I think that cycle needs to be disrupted or interrupted some kind of way. Say, wait a minute, stop. You realize what you're doing here? For example, you said they don't recall what their natural hair was like because the mom might have permed when she was 3 or 4 years old. So she never had an opportunity to love and embrace it as it is. And to say, you need to make that change, well, I don't have a concept of that. You're asking me to go someplace very unfamiliar, and everything that I'm hearing or seeing about someone with natural hair is not acceptable, especially if it's that tight kinky stuff, the tight kinky hair versus the woman who has the naturally more wavy hair. And I think that's where that division began to occur in our community when race mixing occurred during enslavement. Well, we know that those people who had more straight hair because of the influence of the European gene, they were given more privileges because they, related to Master and his family. And so therefore that created, that division between, that created the color gradation, the color line problems for us. I don't know if you're all familiar with color complex.
Yeah.
That's an excellent book.
My research, my workshop, I talk about things out of color complex and hair story and stuff. If you're familiar with that book,
I have hair story. That's another good one. So, I think we're up and over. I'd love to continue discussing with you, but it's 5 after.